The universe, in its infinite wisdom and apparent sense of humor, had produced approximately 14,000 documented species capable of interstellar travel. Of these, roughly 12,000 had mastered the art of convenience to such a degree that the average citizen couldn't change their own atmospheric filters without consulting 3 manuals and a certified technician. The Krell Empire fell squarely into this category, which made their current predicament on planet Vidara 7 particularly entertaining for anyone who wasn't actually there. Commander Thexval of the Krell survey vessel Prosperity's March had been having what the humans would call a day, except it had been going on for approximately 3 weeks. His dorsal plates, normally a vibrant shade of administrative purple, had faded to the color of old bureaucratic documents. His crew, 7 equally exhausted xenobiologists, geologists and resource analysts, had been cataloging this backwater planet's mineral deposits and ecosystem markers with all the enthusiasm of students facing final examinations. "Remind me," the X-Fal groaned, manipulating his hoverpad with one weary appendage, "why we don't just send drones for this." His second-in-command, a perpetually anxious creature named Vexrin, whose species had evolved anxiety as a survival mechanism, twitched nervously. Apparently, the council decided that hands-on experience builds characters and reduces operational costs by 47%. "I'm going to file such a complaint when we return," the X-Fal muttered. With footnotes and appendices. They had been trudging through Vidara 7's wilderness for what felt like geological epochs, living off recycled nutrient paste that all tasted vaguely like disappointment, sleeping in temperature-controlled pods that never quite got the humidity right, and enduring the constant indignity of actually having to walk places when their transport skimmer needed recharging. Their destination, a lake region that scans suggested might contain useful aquatic resources. The lake, when they finally reached it, was admittedly beautiful in that untouched nature way that looked great in tourism brochures, but offered absolutely no amenities. Clear water stretched toward distant mountains, surrounded by vegetation that had never heard of landscaping. The shore was covered in something that scanners identified as rock and sand, both substances the Krell generally avoided touching directly. Finally, the X-Fal announced, his enthusiasm barely registering above absolute zero. "Set up base camp. I want full environmental analysis, water composition readings, and someone please tell me the fabricator has enough power left to make something that doesn't taste like recycled boot material." That's when Junior Surveyor Klepp's scanner started shrieking. "Commander, unregistered life form 30 meters northeast, displaying. Klepp stared at the readout with mounting confusion. "Thermal signature, carbon-based, but the database isn't contamination protocols." Vexrin practically vibrated with alarm. "We need to establish quarantine procedures. This could be an indigenous predator. It could be carrying pathogens. It could be sitting very still by the water," observed tactical analyst Morks, whose species had evolved pragmatism alongside opposable thumbs. "Look." The crew clustered behind a convenient boulder, because that's what trained xenobiologists do when encountering the unknown, hide behind rocks like children avoiding bedtime. They activated their optical enhancers and peered at the figure seated on the shoreline. It was bipedal, which was common enough. It wore fabric coverings, suggesting tool use and social conventions. It held a long, flexible rod that extended over the water, attached to what appeared to be a primitive fiber line. And it was doing absolutely nothing, with an air of profound contentment that the exhausted Krell found deeply suspicious. "What is it doing?" whispered Thexval. "Just sitting there," Klepp replied, adjusting scanner sensitivity. It's been motionless for several minutes. Weight, minimal movement. It's adjusting the rod. The line in the water the figure suddenly stood, yanking the rod upward in a smooth motion that sent something silver and thrashing through the air. The creature caught it with bare appendages. Hans, the scanner, provided helpfully, and held up what was clearly an aquatic organism, now very much out of its preferred environment, and quite upset about it. By the eternal void, Vexrin breathed. It just extracted a living creature from the lake, manually, without any harvesting equipment. That's fishing, Mork said slowly, cross-referencing the database. Primitive resource acquisition technique. Pre-industrial civilizations use it. There's a pre-industrial civilization on Vidara 7. The X-Fal felt his headache intensifying. Why wasn't this in the survey data? Because there isn't, Morks replied. This planet is supposed to be uninhabited except for Class 2 fauna. No sapient species registered. The figure had laid the fish on a rock and was doing something to it with a blade. The Krell's collective squeamishness peaked. Should we make contact? Klep ventured. Protocol says we should observe first, Vexrin said, though he sounded uncertain. Protocol also says we shouldn't be this tired, hungry, and generally done with everything. The X-Fal countered. Let's just introduce ourselves and figure out what's going on. Maybe it's a lost colonist. Maybe it can point us toward actual civilization with real food. They approached cautiously, which meant they activated 17 different safety fields, armed 3 different classes of defensive equipment they hoped they wouldn't need, and walked very slowly while Vexrin muttered prayers to various deities, including 2 he'd just invented for the occasion. The figure looked up as they approached, and the Krell got their first clear view of the creature. 2 eyes forward-facing. Bilateral symmetry. Hair on the upper portion of its head, but nowhere else visible. It smiled, which displayed teeth, always concerning, but the expression seemed welcoming rather than threatening. Hey there, the creature said in what the universal translator rendered as standard galactic trade language. Didn't expect to run into anyone out here. Beautiful spot, isn't it? The translator worked, which meant this was definitely a spacefaring species. The X-Fal relaxed slightly. Greetings. I am Commander Thexfal of the Krell Survey Corps. We're conducting resource analysis of this planet. Might I ask what species you represent and why you're on an unregistered world? The creature, male, the scanner suggested based on skeletal structure and hormonal markers, chuckled. Marcus Chen, human, on vacation. And before you ask, yes, I filed all the proper permits with the Exploration Guild. This system is open for recreational use, as long as you don't disturb anything permanent. He held up the fish. Just caught dinner. You folks hungry? I've got plenty. Several things happened simultaneously. Vexrin's scanner identified human and immediately pulled up a database entry that made concerning reading. Klep made a noise that suggested mild nausea at the concept of eating what they'd all just seen flopping around. Mork started laughing, which sounded like metal grinding against metal, and the X-Fal felt the universe's cosmic sense of humor slap him across the face. Humans. Of course it was a human. You're offering us the deceased aquatic life form, Vexrin managed, for consumption. Marcus looked at the trout, then back at the aliens. Well, yeah, I'm going to grill it. Fresh trout is amazing, especially out here where the water's pristine. You guys never had fish before? We have nutritionally complete synthetic protein matrices, Klep said defensively, formulated for optimal digestive efficiency. That sounds absolutely terrible, Marcus said cheerfully. Look, I'm going to cook this up. You're welcome to try some if you want. No pressure. Cook? Multiple Krell repeated the word like it was from an ancient dead language. Yeah, you know, with fire. The X-Files headache had just achieved sentience and was considering filing its own complaint. You're going to use combustion? Intentionally? On organic matter? That's generally how cooking works, yeah. Marcus set the cleaned fish aside and started gathering pieces of wood from the shoreline. Haven't had a good campfire meal in months. Space station food is convenient, but it's got no soul. You know. The Krell watched in mounting horror as Marcus constructed what their scanners identified as a fuel arrangement optimized for sustained combustion. He piled wood in a small cleared area, surrounded it with rocks, and pulled out what appeared to be a chunk of metal and stone. Is he going to create plasma? Klep whispered. Without containment fields. Marcus struck the flint against steel, sending sparks into a small nest of dry grass and wood shavings he'd prepared. The material caught, smoking, then bursting into small flames that he carefully fed with increasingly larger pieces of wood. Every single Krell safety scanner simultaneously lost its mind. Uncontrolled exothermic reaction detected, one blared. Initiating emergency suppression. No, stop, cancel that. The X-File shouted, wrestling with his equipment as it tried to deploy fire-retardant foam. It's intentional. Stand down. Intentional. Vexrin had backed up several meters. Why would anyone intentionally create uncontained combustion? That's incredibly dangerous. The potential for thermal runaway, atmospheric oxygen depletion, toxic gas production. It's a campfire, Marcus called over, now nursing a respectable blaze. I've got it contained, done this 1,000 times. See? Rock ring, cleared area, water nearby just in case. Basic fire safety. Basic fire safety, Morks repeated slowly, implies that creating fire is a basic activity. Well, yeah, how else would you cook food in the field? The Krell looked at each other, looked at their molecular replicators, their thermal processors, their plasma induction heating units, all currently low on power, looked back at the human sitting comfortably beside his controlled inferno. We use technology, the X-File said weakly. Sure, when you've got power, Marcus agreed. But sometimes it's nice to do things the old-fashioned way, more satisfying. Plus, firewood is free. He placed a flat stone near the flames. Give that a few minutes to heat up, and we'll have a perfect cooking surface. Klep approached cautiously, scanner extended. The combustion process is converting solid carbon-based material into gaseous byproducts and releasing energy as heat and light. It's actually remarkably efficient for such a primitive mechanism. Primitive, Marcus laughed. That's one word for it. I prefer reliable. Fire doesn't need a battery charge or molecular feedstock, just fuel and oxygen, both of which are usually pretty available on habitable planets. The fish cooked with a sizzling sound that made the Krell's olfactory sensors do complicated things. Marcus had produced small packets of what he called salt, pepper, and various herbs from his pack, sprinkling them over the trout with the confidence of someone who actually knew what food tasted like. Your portable provisions include flavor enhancement compounds, Morks asked, fascinated despite herself. Can't have good food without good seasoning, Marcus replied. These are from my garden back on the colony. Basil, thyme, little bit of garlic powder, makes all the difference. You cultivate botanical samples for non-nutritional purposes. Vexrin was taking notes now, scientific curiosity overriding his anxiety. They're nutritional, just not in the way you mean. Food isn't just about calories and vitamins. It's about enjoyment, culture, experience. Marcus flipped the fish. When's the last time you guys actually enjoyed a meal? Silence. The kind of silence that spoke volumes about the quality of recycled nutrient paste. That's what I thought. Marcus pulled the cooked trout off the hot stone, the flesh flaking perfectly. Humans figured out a long time ago that life's too short to eat boring food, even if boring food is technically sufficient, especially if you're on a beautiful planet by a pristine lake watching the sunset. The sunset, they all noticed simultaneously, was actually quite spectacular. Strange how none of them had paid attention to it before, too focused on their scanners and task lists. Marcus ate a piece of the fish, closing his eyes in obvious satisfaction. Perfect. Okay, who wants to try? The Krell exchanged glances. Their food safety scanners were displaying readings that were technically within acceptable parameters, if you ignored the parts about unsterilized preparation surface and open-air pathogen exposure and thermal processing without temperature regulation. Klep, being the junior member and therefore the most expendable, crept forward. It won't cause immediate biological harm. Not unless you're allergic to fish, Marcus said, offering a small piece on a flat piece of bark that served as an impromptu plate. Trout is pretty mild. Good starter fish. Klep accepted it with trembling appendages, regarded it with the suspicion usually reserved for unexploded ordnance, and placed a tiny amount in his intake orifice. His expression cycled through confusion, surprise, disbelief, and something that might have been wonder. It has texture, he whispered, and the flavor profile is complex. Multiple chemical compounds interacting in ways that aren't just nutritionally adequate, but actually pleasant. He looked at the fish like it had just revealed the secrets of the universe. It tastes like something. That's generally the idea, Marcus said, grinning. Within minutes, all 7 Krell had tried the fish. The HFY, with the dignity expected of a commander, admitted that it was surprisingly adequate for primitive preparation methods. Vexrin, after initially panicking about possible contamination, declared it statistically unlikely to cause harm and possibly enjoyable. Morks simply asked for seconds. How did humans discover this? Klep asked, sitting beside the fire with a reverence usually reserved for religious artifacts. The cooking process, I mean. It's ingenious. Marcus shrugged. Probably by accident way back in evolutionary history. Lightning strike causes forest fire. Animals get cooked. Early human tries it and realizes it tastes better and is easier to digest. Then we spent the next few 100,000 years perfecting the technique. You've been doing this for hundreds of thousands of your planetary cycles. The HFY was recalculating his entire understanding of human civilization. Give or take. Fire was one of our first technologies. We built everything else on top of it. Metallurgy, engines, eventually spaceflight. Marcus poked the fire with a stick, sending sparks drifting upward. But we never forgot the basics. Every human kid learns how to build a fire, catch food, survive without technology. It's part of our culture. Why? Vexrin couldn't comprehend it. You have technology. Why maintain primitive skills? Because technology fails, Marcus said simply. Batteries die. Machines break. Systems glitch. But knowledge, skills, those don't need a power source. Plus, there's something satisfying about doing things yourself. Makes you appreciate what you have. The Krell sat in contemplative silence, which was broken by their communicators all chirping simultaneously. Survey Core Vessel Prosperity's March. This is orbital control. A bored voice crackled. We've detected an uncontrolled combustion event at your location. Please confirm status and requirements for emergency extraction. The HFY looked at the campfire, at Marcus, who was now roasting something he called a marshmallow on a stick for dessert, at his crew, who looked more relaxed than they had in weeks. Orbital control. Situation is under control. No emergency. Human recreational activity in progress. Disregard alert. Human. The orbital controller's voice sharpened with interest. Oh, that explains it. Those crazy primates and their campfires. Understood. Orbital control out. Crazy primates. Marcus raised an eyebrow. It's a term of endearment. The Gexval offered weakly. Marcus laughed. I've been called worse. Here, try this. He offered a browned marshmallow. Pure sugar, completely unnecessary. Terrible for you, absolutely delicious. As the evening deepened and the fire crackled, Marcus explained the concept of camping to his increasingly bewildered audience. Humans, he told them, regularly chose to abandon their comfortable homes and advanced technology to spend time in nature, sleeping on the ground, cooking over fires, and basically living like their ancestors for recreation. Let me understand this correctly, Marcus said slowly. You have climate-controlled habitats, instant food preparation, comfortable sleeping arrangements, and you voluntarily give all that up to be uncomfortable. It's not about being uncomfortable, Marcus explained. It's about being capable, self-sufficient, connected to the environment. Modern life is convenient, but it can make you soft. Out here you remember what you're made of. Vexrin looked down at his scanner, which was currently trying to analyze the optimal method of marshmallow consumption. Then at his 3 emergency ration packs, all labeled nutritional paste flavor, approximately vegetable. Then at the human, who had caught his own dinner, built his own fire, and was now offering survival advice with the casual confidence of someone who could probably colonize a hostile world armed with nothing but a sharp stick and positive attitude. We've become rather dependent on our systems, haven't we? He said quietly. Most advanced civilizations do, Marcus said without judgment. Nothing wrong with using technology. That's what it's for. But it's good to remember that you're not helpless without it. Skills matter. Knowledge matters. Adaptability matters. The Gexval thought about their 3-week survey mission, during which they'd been perpetually exhausted, mildly miserable, and completely dependent on equipment that kept needing maintenance and recharging. Then he thought about Marcus, who had traveled to this planet alone, was clearly enjoying himself, and seemed entirely unbothered by the lack of modern conveniences. Would you, he began carefully, be willing to teach us some of these primitive fundamental techniques? Marcus's face lit up. You want to learn survival skills? Absolutely. Fair warning though, it's going to involve getting dirty, some minor physical discomfort, and doing things that your scanners will definitely object to. We're scientists, Klepp said with newfound determination. We can handle field work. That's the spirit. Marcus stood stretching. Okay, lesson 1. Finding clean water without a purification unit. See that rocky outcrop upstream? Water flowing over rocks gets naturally filtered. Not perfect, but usually safe if you know what to look for. The Krell Survey Corps spent the next several hours learning things their ancestors had forgotten generations ago, if they'd ever known them at all. How to identify edible plants. How to build a shelter using natural materials. How to start a fire with just friction and patience, an endeavor that took Vexrin 47 minutes and left him feeling more accomplished than his doctoral thesis defense. By the time the planet's moons had risen, painting the lake in silver light, the Krell had achieved something remarkable. They were camping, genuinely camping, with handmade shelters and a properly maintained fire, and a pile of foraged items that were probably edible, pending analysis. I can't believe we're doing this, Klepp said, staring at his hands, which were dirty from gathering firewood. We're actually surviving without technology. Well, except for your translators, environmental suits, and the orbital ship that could extract you in 30 minutes, Marcus pointed out. But it's a start. How did humans survive long enough to develop spaceflight? Marcus asked. With predators and disease and no protective equipment. Very carefully, Marcus said. And with a lot of help from each other. That's the other important skill, cooperation. Humans are persistence hunters. We might not be the fastest or strongest, but we're stubborn, we work together, and we don't give up. Persistence hunters, Dexval repeated. You mean you literally chased prey until it collapsed from exhaustion? Before we invented ranged weapons? Yeah, run after an antelope for hours until it physically couldn't run anymore. Not elegant, but effective. The Krell contemplated this information while sitting around the fire, a fire they now understood how to maintain, having learned the proper ratio of fuel to airflow. Vexrin had stopped checking his contamination scanner, accepting that some level of natural exposure was apparently survivable. Klep was attempting to whittle a stick with a borrowed knife, producing something that looked more like modern art than any functional tool, but clearly enjoying the process. This has been educational, Dexval admitted. Unexpectedly so. We came to survey resources, and instead we learned that we ourselves have become a rather limited resource without our equipment. It's not a criticism, Marcus assured him. Every civilization makes trade-offs. You've gained a lot through technology. Just don't forget what you've given up in the process. Their communicators chirped again. Survey Corps, orbital control. Your mission time is complete. Ready for extraction at your convenience. The Krell looked at each other, at their partially completed survey work, at the campsite they'd built, at the fire that represented something more than just controlled combustion. It represented capability, independence, the satisfaction of creation without relying on a machine to do it for them. Orbital control, Dexval said slowly. We're going to need an extension. Additional field research is required. 3 more days should suffice. Acknowledged. Extending mission parameters. Orbital control out. Marcus raised his eyebrows. You guys sure? You were pretty exhausted when you showed up. We were exhausted because we were fighting against the environment, Morks realized, treating it as an obstacle rather than working with it. You've shown us there's another approach. Besides, Klep added, I want to try catching a fish myself. It looked satisfying. It absolutely is, Marcus agreed. Okay then, tomorrow morning I'll teach you fly fishing basics. After that, maybe some plant identification and basic navigation without GPS. By the end of 3 days, you'll be able to survive at least a week on a habitable planet without any equipment. A week? Vexrin looked doubtful. Start small. Build up to longer periods. Who knows, maybe camping will become a Krell tradition. As the fire burned down to coals and the planetary night deepened, the Krell found themselves experiencing something novel, contentment that didn't come from completing a task or checking off a requirement, but from simply existing in a moment, warmed by a fire they'd maintained, fed by food they'd helped prepare, surrounded by an environment they were learning to understand, rather than just measure. The galaxy has thousands of spacefaring species, Dexval observed quietly. But I'm starting to understand why humans have a reputation for adaptability. We're not special, Marcus said. We just never forgot where we came from. Every human carries a little bit of their primitive ancestors, the ones who looked at a hostile universe and decided to survive anyway, using nothing but creativity and determination. And fire, Klep added. And fire, Marcus agreed, smiling. When the Krell Survey Corps returned to their homeworld 2 weeks later, 3 days later than scheduled, but with more comprehensive field data than they'd ever collected, their report caused quite a stir. Not because of the mineral analyses or ecosystem evaluations, but because of the extensive appendix on primitive survival techniques and their unexpected utility for modern researchers. The X-Files recommendation that all future survey teams receive basic survival training was initially met with skepticism, then ridicule, then serious consideration, after 3 separate teams reported similar experiences with various humans who all seemed to treat camping like it was normal. The training program was eventually implemented, much to the horror of administrative officials who couldn't understand why anyone would voluntarily learn to start fires without plasma igniters. But out on the frontier worlds, in the wild places between the stars where equipment failed and technology proved insufficient, survey teams slowly learned what humans had known for hundreds of thousands of years, that the most advanced tool was the mind that could adapt, improvise and survive without any tools at all. Marcus Chen continued taking camping trips to remote planets, occasionally encountering survey teams who now asked him for fishing tips rather than questioning his sanity. He taught what he could, shared his fires, and watched with quiet satisfaction as the galaxy's most advanced civilizations rediscovered the value of the most primitive knowledge. Because in the end, civilization wasn't measured by how much you could do with unlimited resources, but by what you could accomplish when you had nothing but yourself, your knowledge, and the determination to keep going. Also, proper seasoning. That was really important too. The universe, in its infinite wisdom and apparent sense of humor, had produced approximately 14,000 species capable of interstellar travel. Only one of them regularly abandoned their starships to sit by lakes, catch fish with strings, and consider this recreation. The rest were starting to think those crazy primates might be onto something.